Hello. Today we still got potential, and I want to talk to you about why action potential travels one direction only. So remember last week we talked about the action potential and how the voltage changes over time, how it is not a straight line but a wave. And if you remember, we've got this diagram here, and we have the membrane potentials stages from resting to depolarization to peak to repolarization to hyperpolarization to return to resting. A couple of things we need to notice for today's lesson. So one, let me just move that back here. One is that if you remember, we said the resting potential for the neurons membrane is about minus 70 millivolts. But in reality, depends on the type of neurons, the membrane resting potential will vary. Say critical pyramidal neurons would be minus 70 to 75. Motor neurons would be minus 65 to 70, and sensory neurons would be around minus 60 to 70. And if you look at the threshold, remember the threshold is basically a mechanism to decide we either fire or we forget about it. There's no fire. And we mentioned about minus 55 millivolts, but in reality, again, depends on the type of neurons. It will be maybe minus 50 to 55 for the cortical pyramidal neurons, minus 45 to minus 55 to motor neurons, and minus 40 to minus 55 for the sensory neurons. So I just want you to know that in reality, when we dig deeper into the field, those threshold and potential would differ, depends on the neuron. We mentioned 70 milli. The reason we mentioned minus 70 millivolt and minus 55 is just like we have a classroom landscape to talk about things. So do bear in mind about these numbers. So the second thing we need to pay attention to today is something called refractory. The refractory phase of the electrical signal being charged or the action potential being fired. And if we remember from the last video, we have something called the axon, which runs this bit here. And we talked about how the neurons are traveling from not a straight line. Instead of straight line, it is more of a wave, a 1, 2, 3, until it is reached the terminal. And today, let's look that more into detail, and it will help answer the question, what is refractory and why cannot action potential fire both ways, right? If we can have a wave in this direction, why can't we have a wave this direction, right? So let's have a look at the very simplistic diagram that I created. And so here we have our neurotransmitter. I finally learned how to pronounce this word, the acetylcholine. So acetylcholine, or short SACH, is a motor neurotransmitter. And let's say it has bonded to the receptor here. And, the inside of the neuron has become increasingly positive. Very positive, right? And here we have our neuron in the resting stage. And as I mentioned, we have the potassium inside, the sodium outside, the salted banana. But the inside is actually very negative at this stage, and the outside is actually very positive because we have some negative ions like protein inside the neurons. So currently it is minus 70 millivolts, right? And let me just clear this up. And let's say here we have become increasingly positive, right? And we have the positive neurons, the positive charges coming this way. What will happen is the inside of the membrane will become increasingly positive because, negative attracts positive, right? And so the positive charges will flow this way and the inside become increasingly positive. And if you notice, I have labeled section A, section B, section C, or you can understand it as patch A, patch B, patch C. And we have the green ones representing the sodium gate, and the orange one representing the potassium gate. And what will happen is, in section A, in this stage, because we have the inside of the membrane has become increasingly positive, and what is the threshold? Let's say minus 55. And then boom, we fire. What we actually do when we say we fire is that this gate, the sodium gate, would actually be open, right? The sodium gate will be open, and when it opens, the positive ion, the sodium will rush in. Let's say I have sodiums rush in here, and in here. And what will happen here is that for this section, it will become very positive, right? So we become very, very positive. And section B currently is negative. And what would happen is negative attracts positive. Hence, we have the wave here, right? And so what will happen when the positive ions rush into section B? Section B will become increasingly positive and reaches the threshold, hopefully, of minus 55 millivolt, and it will fire again. So what happens in section A after all of the, firing and traveling? Let's say now all the positive ions have traveled to section B, right? And what will happen is a couple of things. Then the sodium channel or the sodium voltage gate would open for the sodiums to travel in. And what will happen for the sodium gate in section A is it will become inactive. So you can understand it like maybe not as close, but like it wouldn't do anything now. And the potassium channel actually wouldn't open, and a lot of potassium would actually go out of the channel. And that is why we have polarization, depolarization, repolarization, and then hyperpolarization, and then resting. Because this is what we talk about here. In section A, ways the potassium channels open, the potassium flows out, we would do repolarization here. So the magnetic potential returns to negative. And why is it hyperpolarization? Well, the potassium channel will eventually be inactive or closed, but it will take time for it to close. So it will result in a lot of potassium actually leaving the channel. And hence, this one here will be very, very, very negative in here. So very negative in section A. I'll just note it here. And so section A has gone through the phases here. And hopefully return to resting. And now here is a golden question, right? If the current positive RLs are in section B, and section B is very positive, right? It has opened the gates for sodium to travel in, and at this moment, both section A and section C are negative. Remember what we learned in video 2 about the physics: the same repel, the different attracts. And so why wouldn't the ions then travel back? Why would it only travel forward? But the simplistic answer for now is that because this gate is currently inactive, or you can understand it as closed if you want to, and will not be fired again because there's not enough positive ions to reach to another threshold. Well, this gate is ready, right? We have a different state. Ooh, this is very huge. So this one is ready. It is ready to fire. Without the positive sodium, we cannot reach to the threshold to fire again. And hence, the action potential only travels one way, down to the terminal, and it cannot go back. Well, if you have a hard time understanding this, maybe think about it as a relay race, right? So we have different players, different runners. In the playground here, we have A, we have B, we have C, we have D, and A just ran to B. And you ask A, can you run again? Definitely no. That was like the fastest sprinter I have in my life. I can't. I need to rest. And so B can only give to C, and C give to D. Hopefully D will take us to the finish line. And that's why it only travels to one direction. So if we look at this diagram again, and together with the following diagram, stages after action potential, we actually have two refractory period. One is called absolute refractory period, where the sodium channels are inactivated and no new action potential can be generated. At this stage, it is impossible for the sodium channel to be activated or to open again or to fire another action potential. And if we compare these two graphs, it's kind of like to here, right? It's kind of like after the peak, we fire the action potential. Sorry, after the threshold, we depolarize, we fire the action potential, we repolarize, and we are kind of like in the hyper part of early stages of the hyperpolarization stage. And then the next one is relative refractory period, when the sodium channels have reset, but many potassium channels are still open. So some strong stimuli may be able to fire again, but it is going to be very hard to do so. So it is mainly, I think, the later stage of the hyperpolarization stage. And then we're back to resting. And then the neurons have been reset, and both gates are, closed and ready to fire again. And we can fire another action potential if there's stimuli. So some students would ask, like, okay, so when I'm in the gym, I'm just, do my boxing, punching, and I don't need to punch and stop, or like a cat chasing a fly. The cat will constantly be running around with the fly, and it will not be like run, pause. Like, where is this refractory period? I had a similar question, actually. So this is, hopefully this will give you the answer. The absolute refractory period is 1 to 10 milliseconds, and the relative refractory period is 2 to 5 milliseconds, occasionally longer, so we barely notice that our neurons are taking a break to reset. Well, that's basically it for today's video. We learned why the action potentials only travel one way and managed to go through the video while my cats are running around like maniacs. Some other ways to help you understand. One is from etymology. So we have the word refractory, which comes from refractorious, meaning stubborn and resistant. So we understand refractory period as the neurons are resisting to fire another action potential. Another way to understand it, if you love bodybuilding or like strength training, is that remember if you can do like a bench press of 100 kilos for like one set of 12, and your coach is like, do another one. You probably would be like, I'm sorry, I'm in my refractory period. Like, I need a rest to reset before I can perform another set of a bench press. Oh, I hope you liked today's video. If you have any questions, feedback, please leave me a comment down below. Otherwise, I will see you next time.